finna let this ride. We're finna let this ride until more people come in. Give me a 1 if you enjoy the music. Give me a 2. Give me a 2 if you love the music. Give me a 1 if you enjoy it. Give me a 2 if you love it. Yeah, we about to get started. Just waiting for a few more people to pop in. Yeah. Yeah. Let's get it poppin', lockin'. Get into some real timers.
Two serpents twined on the ivory rod. The south and north governed by God, but the God was the people, the land. The first state built by the black hand, known by Norman district by clan. Federation was always the plan. My ass sat at the busy years here. Justice without tribal fear. When the master took the pilgrimage road, he carried Cayman's governing load. The council stood, the elders here. The palace courtyard, the open air. Not conquest, but covenant seal. The African state on the river revealed. For the colonizer drew the line. Kim and drew the blueprint divine. We do not beg for sovereignty's nine. Invented the state under African God. Five geopolitic. Two serpents twined on an ivory rod. The south and north governed by God, but the God was the people, the land. The first state built by the black hand, known by Norman district by clan. The federation was always the plan. My said at the vizier's ear. Justice without tribal fear. When the mentor took the pilgrimage road, he carried Gibbon's governing load. The council stood, the elders tear. The palace courtyard, the open air. Not conquest, but covenant sealed. The African state on the river revealed. Before the colonizer drew the line, Kim drew the blueprint divine. We do not beg for sovereignty's nine. We invented the state under African God. Let's go.
What's up, Sadiq?
Same wood, same grain, same ancestral night. Left the claws on the throne song. Symbols warding off spiritual harm. Low is blooming in the palace pool. Copied in the courts of Ife's rule. Heated waste, fans blue. Every color holds a value. A spark that killed the woven loom. We've gathered in the room. Not imitation, but memories are. The pattern travels, not the card. Pick up the 80s, pull the thread tie. Classical replica close in the night. Let's do so.
In the throat of the elder, our memory is curled. The oldest words that name the world. Not Greek, not Arab, not Roman tongue, but the mother tongue when the world was young. Medunet, your speech of the divine. Every hieroglyph a boundary line. Yet break the seal, and you will hear the same cadence tickling the inner ear. From the Dogon plateau to the Yuba drum, the grammar waits for the initiate to come. Nominal senses, verbs unbound in the swamps of the delta. The root is found. We do not borrow, we remember the key. Kemet fossilize the tongue of the free. Speak it slow, let the vowels ascend. This language has no beginning or return with no end.
We're about to get started.
In the throat of the elder, a memory is curled. The oldest words that name the world. Not Greek, not Arab, not a Roman tongue, but the mother tongue when the world was young. Medunet, your speech of the divine. Every hieroglyph a boundary line. Yet break the seal and you will hear the same cadence tickle in the inner ear. From the Dogon plateau to the Yoruba drum, the grammar waits for the initiate to come. Nominal sentences, verbs unbound. In the swamps of the delta, the root is found. We do not borrow, we remember the key. Kemet fossilize the tongue of the free. Speak it slow, let the vowels ascend. This language has no beginning, only return without end.
We finna get started. Shout out to everybody who's here. You know, I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I appreciate y'all for being here. You know, y'all, it's really special. We're about to get started. You know, just give me a 1 in the chat if you can hear me loud and clear. Shout out to Mr. Rich. We about to kill it. You know, these Kemet detractors, they ran. They completely ran. You know, Chief X, Varian ran. You know that clown. He ran. Completely ran. They don't talk about, you know, y'all remember the challenge where he's like, does anybody can show me evidence of the ancient Egyptians going to West Africa? And then I proved it, you know, in the Amdua, and he didn't even respond. These dudes are frauds. They're complete frauds. And we're going to go over, you know, for those of y'all who are familiar with this presentation, I gave it, you know, about 1.5 years back on Smash Rockwell's channel. Just showing you the genetic evidence basically destroyed these idiots, you know, and then you still have people continuing to talk about this topic. And I have to let y'all know, the assimilationist will continuously talk about Kemet in the same way that nationalists will talk about it, because they're against Pan-African nationalism. A lot of these people, like Trackfield, you know, y'all know him by Garfield, but ever since he ran from Jabari, he's been known as Trackfield. He opposes this. You have Bobby Banger, Ankh Killer. He opposes the idea that classical Africans could be black simply because they're against Pan-African nationalism. They're moderates, they're pragmatists, and they don't want black people to have a reason to unite in a nationalist sense today. Now, that was partially why, Diop and Obenga went on their journey to prove and validate the Africanity of ancient Kemet. And they weren't limited to genetic evidence, but since genetic evidence is because of, for-profit genetics companies, people think that genetics is more valuable than it actually is. So we're just going to go over some evidence. And shout out to, both Pan-African James and King's Monologue, which King's Monologue was the one, who showed me the microarrays, how, most African genetic studies are biased because they're pinpointing Eurasian genetic diversity and not African genetic diversity. So they're not actually the best tools to use, when it comes to determining African genetic dynamics, especially in antiquity. So that's something that we have to consider, when we're dealing with genetic studies, that there is a natural bias in the direction of Eurasians simply because of the S&P microarrays that they choose to use. There's a natural bias. Shout out to everybody in the chat. This is a presentation that I gave long ago, just dealing with, the genetic links of Kemet in modern Inner Africa. And as you can see, the evidence shows that ancient Kemet was a black civilization. And I use Kimi sometimes because Kimi would be the vocalization in the living language of Metrem and Kimi that as Coptic. So here on the right, you have 19th century images of a Coptic man and woman. In the majority of the documented dialects of Coptic that you can see in the image on the right, that's Mesochemic, Ashmuninic, Asiutic, Akhmimic, Teshnaic, and Cyanic were historically spoken in the south. And that's the area that they generally call Nubia, and I'm going to release a video about how Nubia is flawed. We should remove Nubia from our vocabulary when discussing antiquity because it's a late antique term that at best is related to Nobin. Some scholars have tried to relate it to Nub for gold, but there's no evidence of the usage of that as a toponym widely for that region. Right, you do have evidences of the usage of Golden City being applied to Nakata and other different areas in antiquity, but they never reply to the general area with the term Nubian. Right, so we should completely, dispense of that. Now, when it comes to Meyer's conversation lexicon, and this is a German encyclopedia, published from 1839 to 1984, they literally, describe the Copts as black nations, and they're described as Christian descendants of ancient Kemet. Although intermixing occurred in Lower Kemet after the Mohammedan conquest, Copts in Middle and Upper Kemet largely maintain distinct black African physical traits. So you can see that there. So, this is something that we should consider. So Peter Bagju says Nubia isn't flawed. It's a complete canard. Yeah, Nubian is completely made up. Especially when they say Kush is a kingdom of Nubia. Like you'll see that on Wikipedia. That is just the biggest fraud that I've ever seen. Nubia ultimately was a term created, after Reisner, specifically in the archaeological context, to create a racial hierarchy within antiquity. That's the purpose of Nubia. But if you look at the primary data, Nubia isn't really a term that we should use. At best, we should use Taseti. And you should be specific with respect to chronology, because both Kemet and Kush are Middle Kingdom terms. In the Old Kingdom, you have Tawi, and then you have Taseti. They weren't using Middle Kingdom terms yet. So the idea of a continuous Kush from the Meroitic period back into the Old Kingdom is just pseudo-historical, pseudo-linguistic. It's not something that we should consider as true. So here again, we have just some issues with PCA that we've discussed before here. And there's a lot of different issues with, just the methodology of genetics. So when I'm talking about genetics, I always want to be careful to inform you about the methodological flaws of the field of genetics itself, because genetics has a lot of flaws, believe it or not, and PCA is one of the flaws. And all PCA is a dimensionality reduction tool. That's what PCA represents. So, as a dimensionality reduction tool, they're going to miss a lot of the, accurate information that would be shown if they were able to look at the evidence and the data at face value. And this is not even speaking about what we discussed before when you're talking about how a lot of the data is funneled through biased S&P microarrays, right? That's not even dealing with that at all. It's just dealing with the fact that PCA, principal component analysis, which you see in most modern genetic studies, is very, very flawed, right? And PCA is affected by factors such as marker choice, sample selection, and implementation details, making the replication of results very, very difficult, right? So, and there's also no consensus on the number of principal components to analyze, leading to various approaches among researchers. So, PCA is also limited, right, by the parameter-free nature. So you can literally use PCA. You can use a PCA to prove that Mexicans are part Chinese and part Japanese. Like, you can basically determine results based upon the axis that you pick, right? So, though PCA is considered a gold standard, it is very, very flawed if we look at these pieces of evidence, right? It's considered a gold standard in genome-wide studies, which shows you that genome-wide studies are not only flawed for the sake of, them using biased S&P microarrays, but they're using a dimensionality reduction tool in PCA that has been shown to be littered with methodological errors. And this is not something that we should accept at all. This is not something that we should accept. So, they should not be used, again, to draw historical conclusions. This is something that we also must note, right? And the PCA cannot derive correct conclusions without prior knowledge, right? So, despite the reliability, robustness, and reproducibility of PCA, particularly in population genetics, this is being assessed due to its role as a first hypothesis tester. And PCA fails to perform well in simplistic settings, which leads to contradictions and absurd conclusions. And Peter Bagju says Komombo, which was part of Taseti, was called Nipt for gold, but somehow it's not included in Nubia. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the places, they change the boundary of Nubia based upon what's convenient. Technically speaking, Lower Nubia would be part of Kemet, and then Upper Nubia, would not be, or it would be maybe a liaison zone. But again, it just speaks to the fraud that you see. So look, not all haplogroup predictors are created equal. An example of this is the NevGen haplogroup predictor, which is less accurate than the with-Athy haplogroup predictor. So you see NevGen, and NevGen was actually one of the haplogroup predictors used to say that Ramses III, instead of being E1B1A, was E1B1B and J and all of these other crazy stuff. They used the NevGen predictor. But if you look at the common prediction, and this is from a study of men in Tanzania, the common prediction actually fell in line with Athy more so than NevGen. So not all haplogroup predictors are equal, and you can clearly see this, especially as it relates to PCA, right? Now, there's a limit of phylogeny. Europeans are the majority of the categories of studies in genome-wide ancestry studies, and they're the majority of categorization of individuals. So about 80% of all of the genetic databases are European. And this is going to limit the ability of accuracy. And then also you're dealing with a difference between, genealogical ancestry, and I'm going to bold this, genealogical ancestry is not the same as, genetic ancestry. Genealogical ancestry is individually identifiable ancestors, right? Genetic ancestry is an abstract hypothetical rendering of the inheritance of one's genes. So these are based upon abstracts, they're based upon, certain methodological limitations, right? But that's genetic data, and that's the data supplied by most of these genetics companies. So you have a limited chronological scope. The scope is typically a 10-generation barrier. Bias sampling, there's a lack of sampling among non-European populations. And then you have bias classification. The majority of the variation in Africa remains unclassified. I spell it with a K. There is more variation inside populations than outside. And this is something that we also have to note. So again, when we're talking about genetics, we want to make sure that we add all of the different caveats, and there's numerous caveats to be ethical. Limits of phylogeny, there's limits of the molecular clock, there's limitations with the usage of Bayesian inferences. So we have to be honest about these as well. And you're not going to see, people talking about genetics mention this stuff. You don't really see them even touch this stuff. So how's everybody doing in the building? We got 14 people. Shout out to everybody here. If you like what you're seeing and you want to, see me do more of this, you can hit the Cash App. You can hit the Cash App or the Super Chat. Shout out to Andre. Aniska, shout out to you. I appreciate that. Appreciate the support. Thank you very much. If you like what you're seeing again and you want me to do this more often, hit the Super Chat, hit the Cash App. Definitely prefer Cash Apps because I get them sooner, but if you would prefer to leave a Super Chat, feel free. Now, the Schunemann study, that's been destroyed, left and right. That's been completely dominated by scholars. There's so many different flaws of that study. Even the recent NEURAT study is even worse, honestly, than the Schunemann study. But we went over that ad nauseum, so if you want to, see a breakdown of the Schunemann study, it being limited to, maternal data, only one sepot in the north represent 2.4% of the administrative districts, the beast analysis, which has a lot of flaws, only about 3 full, bodies were found. So again, that shows fraud. So again, you can look at the source in the below if you want to really see that. Pop affiliator, again, this was published in the recent UNESCO papers. So for the people who denied the pop affiliator showing, so-called sub-Saharan, infra-Saharan African origins of these populations, sorry, this is published in the preeminent scholarly text of African history. The UNESCO papers in Shomarka Keita's article. So within the highest levels of African scholarship, they've already confirmed that the people of ancient Kimi were black people. They were related to the so-called, because people like to limit black to sub-Saharan tropical Africa, these are racist terms. People try to limit Africa to these, or blackness to these regions. But if you look at the royals of the Amarna dynasty, the 18th dynasty, the majority of their genetics, according to Pop Affiliator, comes from these sub-Saharan tropical region. So again, that's a nail in the coffin. They are not able to come back from this. This is published in the highest form of scholarship in Africa. And again, a lot of these detractors are low level, they want, these clicks from these sandbores, and they don't actually give a damn about accurate scholarship. So, it's clear there. And then Vanessa Davies, she talked about the genetic version of the invading pharaonic race theory. This is how she described, the Abasir and the ethical problems related to the Abasir. Then you have Dr. Angela Stein, and she's talking about Takabuti being reported as having H4 and more European than African, and she's saying this is reflective of a racist legacy designed to steal African accomplishments and give them to Europeans. And there are scholars who reported on the context of migrations and the presence of Eurasian immigrants in Northeast Africa during the late period. And then you have head curator, Hannah Crowdy, in response to Angela Stein, confirmed in response that Takabuti's ancestors may not have always lived in ancient Kemet. So again, this is one of the individuals Takabuti used to say that these are Eurasians, but in all actuality, there are many immigrants in the society at that time. So then you have Professor Ewan Calloway's mistake, and this is getting into some of the flaws of genetics on the Moda man, right? And they're trying to promote a massive influx of Eurasian ancestry on the continent. And you're going to... the good brother Trill Black, who exposed this. He was talking about the Semitic and the roots of the Semitic, which, again, if you believe in Afroasiatic, then you can't say that the Semitic is not black or the Semitic is not African. Like, if you believe in Afroasiatic, Semitic came from Africa. So the Semitic culture is from an African foundation, if you believe in Afroasiatic. Now, the Debunking school does not promote Afroasiatic, and more than likely Semitic is an independent branch created, that's rooted in Africa. But a lot of people try to say that because the Ethiopians mix with Southern Arabians or Sabians, that means that they're not from Africa, which is completely foolish. Many of those Sabians most likely came from Africa, especially if you believe in Afroasiatic, right? If you believe in it. And you go to the Southern Arabia, you'll see Yemeni populations and populations that appear to be of African descent. So again, Moda man is used as an anchor 4,500 years ago in Ethiopia, and he was found not to harbor any Neanderthal ancestry. So Moda man was completely African, according to this analysis. And if you look at the genetic sequences, even a lot of these PCAs, about West Africans are closer, modern West Africans are closer to Moda man in Ethiopia 4,500 years ago than they are to ancient West Africans, according to most genetic sequences. So that's crystal clear. Shout out to I Am My Mother and Father. Appreciate you for stopping in. Now this is a very fascinating one. Let me know if y'all get this, the Coptic component, if y'all get the importance of the Coptic component. Now we already spoke about the K factor, but just tell me in the comments if you realize the importance of the Coptic component as refined by Dobon. That's how. Tell me in the chat. No takers? See, I've been kicking ass on the Abubakari. We've proven through a pluridisciplinary approach that Abubakari made it to the Americas. We've proven it linguistically, we've proven it, archaeologically, we've proven it historically through oral testimonies. It's crystal clear that, Abubakari, made it to the Americas definitively. And Diawara, especially with relation to Kiate's testimony, stated that he landed in Mesoamerica. So we killed them on that. We've killed them on the Olmecs, and I'm still digging deep and finding more pieces of evidence with respect to the Olmecs, right? Abubakari, his journey would have fallen in line with the Mazatecas, or the Mazatecs. So that would have been, where he landed. But there's a lot of different populations within Mesoamerica derived from the Olmecs that continue to trade, along the established lines with the Malians or the Mande people. So it's been a while since I've been back into the Kemet space, but again, you look at the Coptic component and you can see this. Shout out to Pan-African James. Appreciate you for stopping in the building. So this Coptic component, like if you look at the Coptic component according to Dobon et al., which he says that the Coptic component is indicative of Egyptian ancestry without Arab influence. You see the Beja, Ethiopians, Nuba, Fulani, Darfurians, Maasai, and Luya, who also have the ancestry of the Coptic component. Especially as k equals 4, right? You literally see that. So as you can see, this was not isolated to Northeast Africa. If it is legitimate, it obviously spread across the continent in Inner Africa. So Haber et al., you have this study of the ancient Lebanese, and it's a Near Eastern genetic study that revealed, similarity between the Lebanese and late period ancient Egyptian populations. Now, this is why chronology is important, because they're connecting these Lebanese to Abasir, as if Abasir represents the totality of the population throughout history. These are the tricks that they use. Now, if you look at the time period of the JK288 sample, you can see that this sample is from 97 to 2 BC, after long periods of invasion and immigration. So it would make sense if the modern Lebanese, which the ancient Kemites called Amu, the Remech called Amu, the Kemetiyu called them Amu, it would make sense that they would be related to the Abasir population, because these Abasir populations were Eurasian immigrants. So that's not surprising one bit. So in this study by Haber et al. Only further confirms that the ancient populations prior to this were black, were African. So you talk about the Arabization of Kemet, a lot of individuals, Ngozi, Chief X try to say this. I think even Ankh, Bobby, Banger, Gullah, all the people in the so-called pseudo-killers who promote pseudo-information, they try to say that there's no evidence of Arabization, that the modern people of the country are the same as the ancients. But this study by Dr. Sarah L. Kamel et al. Disproves that, right? So you can see clusters, you can see that, North African and Middle Eastern populations cluster together, reflecting recent gene flow from the east dating back to the Arab conquest period. This would be the Umayyad dynasty and the Abbasid dynasty, right? So during the Abbasid dynasty in particular, you do see some more Central Asian ancestry filtering in as well. So this demographic migration and the Arabization process that submerged the original Amazigh language and custom seems to have been accompanied by substantial gene flow and genetic admixture. This study from 2016 by El Kalmul literally shows that there was an Arabization. So you can't say that the population today is the same as the ancients. This study by El Kalmul et al. Is showing Arabization. It's showing you that Arabs came in and changed the genetic landscape of the structure. So you can't say you can't say that the modern is the same as the ancients. So that's everybody tuning in. Again, if you like what you're seeing, you can hit a Cash App, give me some support. It's really difficult to put this together, and I appreciate any and all support, because it's definitely helpful. It's definitively helpful. Let's continue onward. What do y'all think of this? Give me some comments about what do you think about these studies. What is your favorite study that you've seen so far? What is your favorite analysis? Again, let's go back to some of the ones that we went over. From Pop Affiliator to, the Takabuti study, to Motorman study by Calloway, the Dobon study of the Coptic component, Haber et al. Study showing literally that the ancient Egyptian affinity between Lebanese and the ancient population is the late period, JK2888. And they never mention this. They're deceptive. Then you have El Kamel et al. Study. And again, a lot of these individuals don't want black people to rise. Now, the rise of the black race is inevitable with the changing demographics, but they don't want us to use this fossilized direct piece of evidence of African greatness. And they're never going to stop talking about ancient Kimi. The pseudo killers won't stop talking about it. Chief X won't stop talking about it because they're against African nationalism. They're opposed to African nationalism, Pan-African nationalism. So they have to attack this frame of reference. Now you have Arauna et al. Study, and this reveals complex migration patterns in North Africa, including the Arabization of Egypt in the 7th century, and modern Egyptians having the lowest number of indigenous North African ancestry. So for those who say the modern Egyptians are the same as the ancients, modern Egyptians have the lowest amount of indigenous North African ancestry, according to this study. And this study is showing you an Arabization period. Arabs migrating in and extending their domain. This is obvious. It's undeniable. You can't deny it. Stop trying to deny it. It's crystal clear that this is the case. You know what I'm saying? Now look at this study from Pagani et al. Come on, like look at this study. This is crazy. This study from Pagani is showing the same thing. There was an Arab admixture in modern Egyptian and Ethiopian populations dated to 750 years ago, consistent with the Islamic expansion. And it shows that 80% of non-African ancestry are modern Egyptians. So modern Egyptians, according to Pagani et al., are 80% non-African. And the study says that this ancestry is linked to the Arab admixture. When you mask out this ancestry from the Egyptian genome, they cluster closer to modern Yoruba than Eurasians. So a lot of people try to say, the Ethiopian and the Somali are closer to Arabs than West Africans. The Egyptian, the ancient Egyptian, the Beja, they're closer to Eurasians than West Africans. When you take out the non-African ancestry of modern Egyptians, not ancients, the little remnant of African ancestry that they have is closest to the Yoruba in West Africa, which is pretty hilarious. What is that saying about the ancients? If you want to say that they got that African ancestry, the African ancestry, the indigenous African ancestry, what is that saying about that ancestry? Is this a roast for Chief X? I mean, it's not even really a roast. Chief X is pretty much cooked. I mean, he went from being part of the Lone Star RBG, even though he's not from Texas, he's from LA, Varian. He went from being a part of that to basically pandering to sandbores online. So he's cooked. He's really, really cooked. So, there's not really a roast that I could do for that midget. He's cooked. I mean, his best bet is following Coach Prime in Colorado, maybe trying to get his son to the NFL. I think his son's a football player. That's a better usage of his time than talking about Kemet and grifting the sandbores when he's been proven wrong like 50 ways until Sunday. And he called me a demon. He called me a demon one time for debunking that white cop. And that was pretty funny. So Soikeda connects the presence of EM35 and Kimi to Pleistocene migrations northward, and he associates EM2 there, exemplified by figures like Ramses III of the 20th dynasty, with inter-African Happy River Basin populations, suggesting their role in the origin of the first pastoral cultures on the continent. Right, so EM35 and EM2 are definitively rooted within classical Africa. Appreciate that. I am my mother and father. This is just some more data. Again, we're getting into it. Haber et al., Arauna et al., El Camel et al. Like, there was an Arabization period. It is so impossible to deny that there was an Arabization period. And the haplography, the uniparental markers from, Kemet came from the south, according to Shamarka Keita. So, I mean, even just with this alone, I'm not even halfway done through with the presentation, but even with this alone, like, it's just game over. It's completely game over, you know? And you can see this 19th century Beja man here. And we also got to talk about them trying to create racism in Africa by creating races in Africa. Like, you hear people say Igbo race, Yoruba race, Bantu race, Mande race, Somali race, and they're trying to use these linguistic phyla to create different races in Africa. It's really nasty. It's nasty work. And you have Dadanazio et al., talking about, the fact that Fulanis are 30% Ibero-Mauritian and Yoruba are 13% Ibero-Mauritian. So I thought North Africa was separate from, Inner Africa. But you literally see, like, the Takakori did not have any Neanderthal. The fact that they tried to say Takakori was non-African just because it was related to Fulanis, Takakori did not have any Neanderthal DNA. So that means Takakori was 100% Homo sapien sapien, and therefore an African. So they try to play games, Nadine Salem et al. They try to play games with that. But if you just look at the fact that there's no Neanderthal introgression, shout out to Pan-African James, that will show you that they're Africans, right? And they always, like, even the new Ratatau shows, the new Ratatau study shows you that, that they didn't want to touch the Neanderthal point. They absolutely didn't want to touch it. If you look at the New Ratatau supplementary information, you can literally see it. They didn't want to touch the Neanderthal at all. So Neurat likely had 0% Neanderthal like Takakori. Shout out to my good brother Kadir, the Raccoon Slayer. I appreciate your support. You're one of the top supporters of the channel, and you're going to get a gold plaque for when it's all said and done, because, y'all don't really know how difficult this is. PayPal. I believe I do have PayPal, like a personal PayPal set up that I can give to you. That I could give you, I am my mother and my father. Shout out to your name, by the way. I really like it. It's pretty cool. So, I mean, look at this. This is a very, very fascinating development. This is a very, very, like, when we look at the data itself is literally showing you. It's literally showing you that the ancient Kemites were black. It's showing it to you. So, like, we have to stop listening to these frauds, these people who are against Pan-African nationalism, right? We have to stop listening to these frauds. These individuals are bad actors. They're not people that we should, pay attention to. They're not people that we should, confide in, because, like I said before, they are against African nationalism. They are completely against African nationalism. This is why they oppose Kemet. They oppose Kemet being black, because they don't want us to be able to use this tool for African nationalism. That's the purpose. He said, I built an AI reader website to teach our kids our history through our philosophy. Shout out to the Mighty Walk. Shout out to Pan-African Designs and Apparel. We're about to take this to another level. We're about to take this to the next level. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And we have a lot of things that we're working on. We have a lot of different, aspects here in the Bay Area and beyond. We have a lot of things coming. So stay tuned and, keep it lit. So when you look at the Siwa Oasis Amazigh, you can literally see that they have high frequencies of inter-African affinity. And look, these are so-called Berbers. People like to talk about the Berbers. The Berbers are not black. The Berbers are not African, right? People like to talk about the Berbers. And there is something to be said about, a lot of the oral narratives that they have, particularly within the Islamic era. But maternal analysis of the Berbers of the Siwa Oasis, right? And this is in Egypt. This is literally the same country with the least amount of indigenous North African ancestry. And these are Amazigh North African populations. They have the frequency of M1, LOA1, L3I, L4, and L4B2, which show that they are more closely related to Infra-Saharan Africans than Eurasians. A 2018 study on Judy Knox showed that his maternal lineage was U5B2B5, and he was linked to Berber, Fulani, and Senegambian populations such as the Papel. So you can literally see Judy Ankt, right? You can literally see that he was related to a lot of these so-called Libu or Libyan populations. You could see this in this genetic study. So when you look at this little girl, she's a Siwa Amazigh girl from Egypt. It is crystal clear that these are Africans. These are inter-African populations. And look, I'm taking this to the next step. You're going to see some children's books from Kamjiverse. You're going to see a revamped Kamjiverse website showing all this data. I'm working meticulously on a Substack. I'm doing an article about the veracity of Abubakari's voyage from a multidisciplinary perspective, proving that his voyage was successful. I'm doing all of that and then some. So, stay tuned. Kamjiverse is going to be taking it to the next level. And again, with your support, we are going to be able to conquer, this space. I do know the shadow banning has been occurring. The shadow banning, my channel should be a lot bigger than it is. But again, with your support, with your love and support, you make it happen, right? I think when they speak of white Berbers are not indigenous, yeah, definitively the white Berbers are absolutely not indigenous. I will say that 100%. And I am my mother and father. You can give me your email, and we can have a talk. And then the Mighty Walk. If you send me a message, or if you send me an email to kamjiverse@gmail.com, I could add you to my Discord, and that's the tool that I'm using. Until they start bringing in the, age identification. That's going to cause me to probably bizounce, but for the time being, that's what we have available. And you can see in this slide, and this is one of the more deceptive tactics. My info is on your Patreon. Oh, for sure. I didn't even know that you were one of the yeah, see, a lot of y'all have different names. So I'm not really sure who you are on the Patreon, but shout out to you for being a patron. Right. Sometimes you got to remind me, because like a lot of the longtime supporters, I don't really remember, or I don't really have access to your name profiles. Let's move on to this. Kind of want this to be. I guess I can rock with this. So, we can move on. Shout out to everybody in the building. Shout out to everybody in the building. So again, this is a more deceptive practice, dealing with, I am my mother and my father. I'm an engineer by training, and I do this as part of my independent research. But you've heard, Chief X use this argument that, oh, the Bohairic speakers aren't black, which is a lie. There are black women in Cairo today who are Coptic Christians who speak Bohairic in church. Bohairic is a liturgical language. Bohairic only represents 9% of the documented dialects. So people who deceptively try to say, oh, look at the Bohairic speakers, they're not black. That proves that the ancients weren't black. First of all, let's say that Bohairic was the only dialect. It could be possible that the ancients were mixed in with different Eurasians and they became lighter over time. That doesn't mean that their language wasn't originally spoken by black folks. But even when you get down to the fact that 60% of the documented dialects were in the south of the country in so-called Nubia, and the fact that there are literal black people today in Cairo in Egyptian churches who sing in Bohairic, the liturgical language, that completely debunks that pseudo argument. That argument is terrible. That's one of the worst arguments that I've ever seen about this. So, we finna get it going, on and on, and we're gonna keep it pushing. Now, Holfelder et al.'s analysis on genomic variation in Northeast Africa reveals that modern Egyptian Copts and Arabs have the most Neanderthal genes of any population on the continent. Both Copts and Egyptian Arabs are estimated to be 70% European and related to the linear Bonder ceramic culture of Germany, 5500 to 4500 BCE, 7500 to 6500 years ago. And you see Coptic Father Anthony Murad, obviously not related to the ancients. So I'm going to let this sit here. And y'all tell me what you think in the chat. Egyptian Copts and Arabs have the most Neanderthal genes of any population on the continent, and we're 70% European. What do y'all think about that? Let me know in the chat. Yeah, so again, you see, for people who say, "Oh, the moderns," right? I remember being on a live with Concrete Corey and what's the dude's name? I can't even remember his name. He runs a channel, Carnivorous Podcast, and I mentioned this point to them, and they couldn't get it. I don't know. Maybe They weren't thinking properly. But again, if you claim that the modern Egyptians are the same as the ancient Egyptians, you're saying the ancient Egyptians are 70% European. And you're saying that they're related to the linear bonder ceramic culture of Germany. Look at the Hochfelder study. Look at these studies. These are genetic studies showing this. These people have the most Neanderthal genes on the continent. You're saying that the ancient Egyptians were Neanderthals. Or at least mixed with Neanderthals, which there's no evidence. Even the Neurat study that they cooked the books for the Neurat study. You know, that study didn't even mention Neanderthal affinity. And if they wanted to show that it was 20%, Levantine, they would have shown Neanderthal affinity. Even some of the Moroccan populations during the Neolithic had Neanderthal ancestry. So they didn't even sequence Neanderthal. And that would have just killed them. That would definitely have killed them if they were to mention that. So we're going to keep this popping. Basically showing that the Kerma population is more closely related to the founders of dynastic Kimi than the populations of the late period who experienced mixing with Mediterranean populations. So, this source is showing and telling you that Kerma, which is so-called Upper Nubia, is closer to the founders of dynastic Kemet than the late period. So Upper Nubians from outside, quote unquote, outside the civilization are closer to the founders of Kemet than the late period are. I don't know if y'all get that. I don't know if y'all feel that. I don't know if y'all can understand because I'm not seeing much in the chat. I don't know if y'all understand the gravity of this source. The bioanthropological data. I don't know if y'all understand the gravity of this. Seriously. This is pretty epic, if you ask me. Let's go back to the rock tombs of Meir. I mean, that's one of my favorite sources dealing with this topic. The rock tombs of Meir. Where is that at? It's like deep into here. It's a really good source right there. Happy the Black and Henny the Black. Anybody's, they didn't call themselves black. They didn't call themselves black. It's just like, come on. Come on now. When you say not quite, what do you mean when you say not quite? You don't understand that the skulls of Kerma, which is outside of Kemet, to the south, are closer to the founders of dynastic Kemet than the late period, showing you that there was mixing with so-called Mediterranean populations during the late period. You know what I'm saying? This is really, really fascinating. This is fascinating. Even more than the genetic stuff. This is like bioanthropological analysis. This is really, really good stuff. So moving on. Mani et al. Study reveals that the profile of modern Egyptians is not identical to the ancient Egyptians, and they have ancestry from recent Eurasian migrations. Look at this modern man. So Mani et al.'s analysis, Y chromosome analysis in Egypt suggests a genetic regional continuity, but he's showing you that modern Egyptians in this source are not identical to the ancients. You see this? So there are numerous sources. We have Mani et al. I want y'all to remember this. We have Mani et al. Source, Pagani et al. Source, Erauna et al. Source, El Camel et al. Source, right? Haber et al. There's numerous sources showing you that there was an Arabization period. Numerous sources. it's undeniable that there's an Arabization period, and that the moderns are not the descendants of the ancients primarily. So according to Dr. Shamar Kekeda, cosmopolitan northern Egypt today is less likely to have a population representative of the core indigenous population of the most ancient times. Because we know that there's been some clear mixture. We know this. We know this for a fact. For a fact. Now we're gonna get into some of the genetic research. Let me know if you want me to continue. If you want to continue, with this genetic data, I may split it up. I've been on for an hour. I may split it up. I don't know if y'all want me to continue. Y'all may want me to close it off and then do a part 2. But let me know in the chat. Let me know in the chat if you want me to continue, or you want me to close it off and do a part 2. Yeah, Miser. That's a good point, Pan African James. Look, I had a request for a roast, and I could tie it in if y'all want me to do the roast of Real Dana Live, who is the co-host of Judge Joe Brown. We could tie that into this if y'all really want a late night roast session. If y'all want a late night roast session, we could definitely do it. I'll definitely do it right now. Y'all gotta let me know in the chat. Bro, I don't want this shit to be. No problem. I'm my mother, my father. Yeah, if you send me an email on Kamjiverse, I can send you some PayPal information. I appreciate that. I can send you some information about how to tap in, and we could get it. Is Mr. K still in the building? I want to see if Mr. K is still in the building. If you are, let me know in the chat. I don't think Mr. K is here. So with that said, I might just quickly run through this unless he shows up. So again, you got BM60 haplogroup, and Sudanese cop. That's the email in the chat. So you see BM60 in Sudanese Copts, and this lineage is associated with Infra-Saharan Africans who originated in the Middle Happy River Valley and migrated northward and founded dynastic Kemet. That's according to Hassan et al.'s analysis right there. Crystal clear, crystal clear, crystal clear, crystal clear. You know, it's something that we should not ignore at all. Clear evidence. So we're going to quickly run through these. And I'm going to cap off the show. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Again, you know, none of the Kemet detractors have ever mentioned this study. You've never heard Chief X mention this study. You've never heard the pseudo killers even touch this study. You know, Ngozi and all the other dudes, which really shouldn't even be mentioned because they're irrelevant. They're completely irrelevant. But none of them, they have not touched these studies. These are advanced studies. This is advanced genetic data that I've compiled. Non-black people can't call the land Kemet. They can only call the land, called the black land where black people reside, aka Sudan. These people are telling on themselves. No, yeah, facts. Facts. They definitively are. We're going to run through these a little bit, and I'm going to cap off the show. I may actually come back and do a little roast on another live. I'm thinking about it. If Mr. K is there, I may do it. But I got to see if he's here. Right, so then we got Schlebusch et al., two-way migration spanning 3,000 or 1,000 years ago, connecting West Africa to the Happy River Basin. They ain't touching this. They just ignore it, honestly. Like James knows, the people who've been here knows, they just ignore these studies. They act like they don't exist. We've killed them. We've destroyed them. This debate is over. Smash killed them, showing that they call themselves black. Smash killed them. He literally killed them on that. We've killed them on the genetics. They're done. They're dead. They ain't got no comeback. They lost the war. All they got to do is like cop pleas and all this type of stuff and act like it's not there. It's the same thing. Y'all notice that? Y'all notice it's the same thing whether you're dealing with the Olmec debate or the Abu Bakari debate or the Kemet debate. You give evidence and they act like the evidence doesn't exist. They act like the evidence never happened. That's what's crazy to me. Like they literally act like the evidence never happened. But you know what I'm saying? Like we're gonna keep it pushing, we're gonna keep it moving, you know, we gonna get it popping. Right? We're gonna get it popping. We're gonna run through these a little bit. Shoot, I don't even remember. I got a lot of data. So we got the genetic relationship across the Sahel, SPA, SPAT2 gene, KRT39, the pig gene, chromosomes related to spermatogenesis, hair follicle differentiation, and glycose flight, plidinacysol anchor biosynthesis. That links across the Sahel. You have, Kushite populations migrating south. You see East African lactase persistence markers in Southern Africa showing a migration south. This is a so-called Bantu for all the Bantu people out there. This is Bantu. Look at the Bantu with East African lactase persistence markers. Look at the so-called Bantu area of diffusion. That's what you got to call it, Bantu area of diffusion, Nilo area of diffusion, Mande area of diffusion, Afroasiatic area of diffusion, Bantoid area of diffusion, Benue-Congo area of diffusion. These are area of diffusions. You ask, when did we first show up to this Earth? I would say, if I were to use like biology, I would talk about, you're talking about 1 million. Modern Homo sapiens was like 70,000. But Homo sapiens as a whole, like, I'd probably put that at 1 million. Maybe a little bit less. No, maybe not 1 million, like 300,000 actually. 300,000 or so years is when we came. I don't believe we fell from the sky. A lot of abos promote that. Maybe there was a panspermia, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. He promotes that, like, we were seeded from a different planet, which would probably validate a lot of the biblical narratives and other narratives. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like that. Nancy Berditau, look at for all the people who follow Islam, you will like this, the idea of West African affinities or so-called Middle Eastern West Asian affinities, but you also see an Egyptian component in the grass fields in, Eastern Nigeria, so-called narrow Bantu Bantoid. And this is Nancy Berditau's analysis. We've spoken about that from 2023. And personally, I'm trying to see, what's coming up for the new genetic studies for 2026. We're going to break them down and analyze them. I know Pan African James is up to date, as he always is on that. The Barone people in the middle belt of Nigeria have East African ancestry. And they're linked to populations like the Teta. So the Barone people, the middle belt region, they help validate a lot of the oral histories that we have in Africa. The study also shows the Wolof people sharing close affinities with the Oromo. This is Chaudhry et al.'s analysis, genetic analysis, right? So you can clearly see interregional African commonalities here. Hanihara showed the zygomatic trait in ancient Kimi, shared with infra-Saharan African populations. You see that zygomatic bone there. So they don't share zygomatic traits with North Africans and Eurasians. So not only do the craniometrics of the ancients not match, but the zygomatic bone more so matches infra-Saharan Africa. And you see these fake pretendians and abos talk about high cheekbones being Cherokee, not knowing that high cheekbones actually exist among African people. These zygomatic traits. So then you see, the body plan, the body anatomy of the ancient Kemites being super negroid. The indices, dental cranial brachial crural indices, show that ancient Kemet was tropically adapted with tropical African populations, according to Dr. Shamar Kikeda. I'm dropping a lot. I'm giving y'all a lot in a real short amount of time. But I'm giving y'all a lot of juice, a lot of data. Give me some love. I don't know if I should continue. I feel like y'all need to give me some more love on the Cash App or the Super Chat. I don't know if y'all really want me to continue. I feel like I'm just kind of like beating the dead horse at this point. Look, if you want me to continue, you can go ahead and give me a little bit more support. If not, I'm gonna let the music just roll through, and we could continue on the next chapter. We'll give it like 2 to 3 minutes to see if y'all want to continue. And then after that, I'll just do a short little roast after I hop off from this before calling it a night. I know it's already morning for some of the people on the West Coast, or East Coast rather. Yeah, Africa's got to be united. Africa's definitely got to be united for sure. For show, Z. All right, I think we finna ride out. Appreciate y'all for tuning in to this. Appreciate the love and support. You know, shout out to Andre. You know, shout out to Kadir. You know, y'all could go back on this one. I gave this presentation before, but y'all could go back on this one and just look at all the different sources that I used, you know, to be able to define this. Look at all the different pieces of evidence that you see here. You can search up the sources yourself. I literally have them displayed at the bottom of the slide. Most other people don't do this. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, y'all can pay attention to that and have a really, really good form of an argument when you have these debates. Literally just fire them off the tongue and you'll be good. So with that, appreciate y'all for tuning in. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one. Peace.